Hi, my name is Daniel Rains, and this presentation is about Gandhi's autobiography, the story of my experiments with truth. And in this presentation, I will give you a book summary and I will discuss the six lenses of leadership as discussed in the book Studying Leadership by Jackson and Perry. Book summary. So I chose the quote, "Writing an autobiography is a practice peculiar to the West. I know of nobody in the East having written one, except amongst those who have come under Western influence." I thought this was a perfect slide to include because Gandhi uh, really found his place by being a translator between the British and the Indian communities there in South Africa and in other places. So the book is chronological, and he discusses different memories he has from youth to old age. And it's called Experiments in Truth because he recounts each moment in his life and retells them with complete and open honesty, even if it's kind of detrimental to how he's viewed or his kind of image in those stories. Important topics in his life that were really kind of main themes throughout the book was his absolute dedication to morality. In my opinion, he held that kind of supreme in his life, well above religion. It was all about doing the right thing and being ethical. Vegetarianism was very important to him, and I felt that his vegetarianism and morality really went hand in hand throughout the whole book. Vegetarianism was a main theme, kind of from beginning to end. He also talks about religion, but in a lot of ways he'll draw from the different religions to support his own stance on vegetarianism and morality. His cross-cultural experiences was really kind of a key component as well between the British and these Indian communities. The latter part of the book, talks a lot about his experiences as a lawyer, civil disobedience, and as a leader of some of these different movements. The first lens of leadership is leadership through the leader. Who is creating leadership? How does the leader? What part does the leader play? Kind of in the leadership process. So Gandhi was very much devoted to morality, and that really directed all of his decisions. And that was really a key component on how he created his leadership and really kind of the foundation. And again, vegetarianism was a cornerstone of this because as vegetarian, one of his philosophies there was that the more helpless the creature, the more duty a man has to protect it and not conquer it. And so the more helpless the creature, so like a lamb or something like that, we'd have more duty to protect that creature than maybe a lion in a certain sense. Vegetarianism also allowed him to form these connections while he was in Britain and cross that cultural and language barrier because it was very hard for him to find, vegetarian food. In Britain, growing up as a vegetarian, it was a lot of diverse vegetarian dishes, but once he got to Britain, it was very difficult. There in London, he was able to find a vegetarian restaurant in London and kind of integrate with these different vegetarian groups there in Britain, and that allowed him to form these connections and friends with people from the British culture and learn how to communicate. So even though they both spoke English, this was really where he learned the different customs and how to communicate effectively. Leadership through the follower, and how is followership created? Now, idea is that the followers, in a lot of ways, choose their leader. You can't really be a leader without the followers, and sometimes the followers choose a person that really represents them, and that's how this leadership is created. So in this case, the followers were the people from the Indian communities, and I feel like they followed Gandhi. They really selected him as a leader, for one, because he was very good at listening. He could empathize. He spoke their language. He spoke multiple languages from the Indian country. But he was also able to kind of translate the British cultures and communications so he could communicate with them and then also communicate back with the these Indian communities and really kind of cross that cultural barrier. And so they chose Gandhi because he really represented them um, in their experiences with persecution and hardships. And he gave them a voice. So he was really selected by his followers to give them a voice and to give them um, kind of their purpose there. The next lens of leadership is leadership through process. How is leadership created? What is happening that's creating this leadership? And in this one, the process was really Gandhi kind of translating. So he was able to find these communities that needed representation, and he was able to communicate their he was able to first, the most important part, he was able to listen to them, understand them, and learn the problems on both sides of the situation. So not only on maybe on the British side and the English speaking side, but also on the Indian side. And he could understand not only their languages, but their cultures. And the Indian culture was very complicated. This was one of my first introductions to this Indian culture. And it was, a lot of aspects of it are very difficult to understand. His other processes, he was using fasting. He was kind of famous for fasting, not eating for long periods of time. And the first example of that is one of his students he was trying to raise kept misbehaving. And as sort of a punishment towards that student, he fasted himself for 14 days. And it was, very kind of a painful and difficult thing, and sort of subjected the student, made him responsible for it. And it did bring about change. And it might have influenced his later decisions to fast to motivate change. His important skills, he was very good at listening and he was very patient. And that was really critical on letting people know that he was listening and being able to understand, those problems. And the other processes, he was very keen on the importance and ethical implications of money. And I chose this quote because it made me laugh, because Gandhi was such a trusting person and believed in the good in all people. But he says, one could rely on people's promises in most matters, except in the respect of money. So he always required money up front, never went in debt, and he always wanted to collect his money kind of on a tax basis. So he was a public attorney, and he wasn't representing, specific clients, trying to represent their interests so much as represent the truth, and kind of dedicated himself to being moral, and knew that it was important to have, kind of a public tax system to collect his money for his fees to ensure that he remained moral and that his ethics weren't in question. Leadership through performance, and what is created by leadership. So what is the leadership? Without leadership, there would be no change. So what is the change that this leadership is creating? And I guess why? What is the reason for it? So Gandhi gave voice and power to the poor and mistreated Indians. He created unions of workers. So a big problem a lot of the times is in particular, there was a very unfair tax on some of the Indian workers and some of the Indian residents. And so he was able to, give them a voice, give them kind of the power to create change. He unionized the workers, and he was able to convince them to sort of organize themselves and to fight for some of these changes. And he also developed civil disobedience by choosing morality over the law. We again see his morality kind of come through in his leadership, where if the law was against what he determined to be the most moral choice, he would peacefully go against the law. It's what he called civil disobedience. He was also able to establish schools and share the importance of character and morality with everybody he met. And he was also able to share cleanliness and sanitation and really help communities prevent diseases and all these sicknesses simply by sharing cleanliness and sanitation and teaching them to live healthy lives. So without him, these communities really would have been a lot worse off, and they still would have been poor and uneducated. He was really able to create a lot of change through his leadership. The next lens is leadership through place. And where is leadership created? And this one was very interesting in Gandhi's situation. And leadership, in this case, was really created by Gandhi's moving and never living in one place. He was able to learn all these different cultures, and he talks a lot about what he chose to wear. And the way he would wear his clothes would help him integrate, in to the different communities and kind of establishes himself there. And so, his vegetarianism allowed him to establish himself into different communities. His time in London allowed him to learn British customs, which was really a key component of his leadership because he was able to learn how to effectively communicate in English. He also learned, he was well learned in multiple Indian languages. So his time in India, again, was very important, his education. And also his time in South Africa, he was able to learn and integrate himself in with these different Indian cultures, which allowed him to really be a translator and really represent people. The next lens of leadership is leadership through purpose. And this is why leadership is created. What was the need that kind of brought leadership about? And in this case, it was in Gandhi, there was persecution in South Africa. There was poor living conditions, and there was really a need for people to be able to translate between these different cultures. And there was a lot of conflict and strife. And he was very able, they needed somebody that could empathize with both sides so they can finally communicate and they can come to these resolutions and figure it out. The Indians needed a voice and a teacher, and he really gave them that voice in that translation. He was also dedicating protecting the most helpless, and there was a lot of need for that. There was a lot of poor workers that were getting unfairly taxed. They were essentially slave labor because they weren't able to understand maybe their salary minus taxes, and there'd be some exchange rates because we've got Indian money and British money, and they were maybe able to understand that they were basically working for free. And so there was a need for education, and there was a need for leadership and how to teach them to make a better life for themselves and being self-sufficient. And I think they were also, some of these Indians were looking for an opportunity to kind of fight back a little bit, and Gandhi gave them that maybe that confidence. He's able to unite them. So, in conclusion, it was very interesting reading about Gandhi's life. It was my first introduction ever into the Indian culture. It was very complicated and it was very interesting. One of the most interesting aspects was Gandhi's relationship with his wife. He was married at 13 in an arranged marriage. It was very interesting listening how this relationship kind of developed from that very young age into old age, and they really had a lot of struggles and a lot of working together, raising their kids. It was very interesting. I found myself wanting to hear more autobiographies about people in these arranged marriages, both the husband and wife, and and how that turned out. It was very fascinating. So I hope in this presentation you were able to learn a little bit more about Gandhi and his life, and also understand a little bit better how he was a leader through these different lenses of leadership. Thank you.